How much would 1 cup of water cost you? Not in money, in blood, in fire, in the lives of people you have not yet met, but will come to love more than your own. A lone rancher in the Arizona desert is about to find out. He does not know it yet. He is bent over a post, sweating into the dirt, 41 years old and already finished with this world. He has buried a wife. He has buried a child. He has trained himself, slowly and carefully, to hope for nothing at all. Then he hears the footsteps. He turns, hand already on his belt. 3 women. Apache, half dead. Their eyes have seen the end of something. And behind them, though he cannot see it yet, an entire war is walking up out of the rocks toward his door. Desert sun came down like molten iron that afternoon, and the cracked earth drank none of it. Eli Caldwell wiped his brow with the back of his wrist and bent again to the fence post he'd been wrestling for the better part of an hour. 3 years he'd worked this land, 3 years of dust and silence, and his own voice gone rusty from disuse. Out here a man could pass a whole month without hearing a word that wasn't his own, and Eli had stopped minding. The town of Dry Hollow sat 3 hard days east by mule, and he liked the distance the way some men liked a locked door. He was 41 years old and looked older. The sun did that, the grief did the rest. The quiet was so complete that when he heard the soft press of feet behind him, his hand jumped to his belt before his mind caught up. Old habit, the kind that kept a man breathing this far from anywhere. He turned fast. Heart slamming, 3 women stood before him, Apache. Young, all of them, thin as fence wire, their clothes gray with dust, their faces hollowed by something worse than hunger. They carried no weapons. Their eyes held a thing Eli knew, because he had worn it himself once, on a road 3 years back, the day everything he loved went into the ground. Not fear exactly, past fear. The flat, scraped clean look of people who have already lost so much that one more loss barely lands. The one in front raised her hand, slow, careful, the way you approach a wounded animal. She pointed past him toward the well. She said nothing. She didn't have to. And Eli looked at the well, then at the 3 of them, then at the well again, while something old and stubborn argued with something older and softer underneath it. The water was scarce. It always was. Scarce was not the same as gone. And a man who would let 3 souls die of thirst over a few gallons was not the man Eli wanted to be when he stood before his maker. He nodded once. Curt, like it cost him. They moved to the well with the carefulness of people braced for the offer to be snatched back. Drew the bucket. Drank. Greedy and grateful at once, but not a drop wasted. Watching them, Eli understood. These were people who had learned the price of water the hard way, who had counted swallows, who had maybe knelt beside someone they loved and watched them stop needing water at all. They finished. The one in front bent her head in a small bow and set something on the ground at his boots. He crouched, picked it up, a bracelet, woven from natural fiber, threaded with small beads, every knot tight and even and deliberate. Payment for water. He turned it in his rough fingers and felt a thing he had not felt in a long while, the small ache of being seen as a man worth thanking. When he looked up, the 3 women were already gone, folded back into the rocks like the desert had tucked them away. No dust, no sound, nothing to prove they had stood there at all except the bracelet warming in his hand. He stayed put longer than he meant to, turning it over, wondering. Who were they? Where did they come from? What kind of trouble sends 3 young women walking alone across open country with no men, no horses, no water of their own? The stories the men told in Dry Hollow always ended badly, and Eli had learned to keep clear of stories that ended badly. He pushed the bracelet into his pocket and went back to the fence. But the question stayed. They trailed him through the afternoon like flies he couldn't wave off. Because there was something about the way they'd moved. Not lost. That was the thing that gnawed at him. People dying of thirst stumble. They weave. They beg loud. These three had come to his well like they'd known it was there. Like they'd walked a long way on the strength of knowing it. Which meant somebody had told them. Which meant they were not the only ones. He fed the horses, checked the thin scatter of cattle, drove the last post, and strung the last wire as the sun bled itself out along the western rim, and the whole dead country went orange and deep wounded red. Ordinary work, the work of any evening, and yet his eyes kept lifting to the rocks, where the three had vanished, half expecting them to step back out, half hoping they would, which surprised him, because Eli Caldwell had spent 3 years training himself to hope for nothing at all. A man gets good at that, hoping for nothing. It is a quiet skill, and it asks a quiet price, and the price is that when something does come walking up out of the heat to stand at your well, you have forgotten how to want it to stay. He told himself it was nothing. 3 travelers. Gone now. He'd likely never see them again. He was wrong about that before the sun was fully down. By the time Eli turned for the barn, the light had gone long and gold, and the shadows reached after him across the yard like fingers. Then he stopped cold. The barn door stood half open. He always closed it. Always. A man living alone learns his own habits the way he learns his own breath, and Eli's hands shut that door every single evening without his head needing to ask them to. His palm found his belt again. He eased the door wider, braced for whatever waited on the far side. The barn was clean, not tidied. Clean, cleaner than it had been in the whole 3 years he'd owned it. The straw lay stacked in squared-off piles, sharp-cornered as a soldier's bunk. The harness hung from hooks he'd forgotten the wall, even had oiled and looped and ready. The floor had been swept down past the dust to the bare, gray boards, and his 3 horses stood brushed to a shine, fresh feed mounded even in their troughs, their coats throwing back the last of the light like river stones. A chill walked up the back of his neck that had nothing to do with the cooling air. They had come back. The 3 of them. Come back and done all this while he hammered at his fence not 200 yards off, and he had heard nothing. Not a footstep, not the creak of the door, not the soft talk of women working close together. They had crossed his own land like smoke and gone again, and the only proof they left was the work. Sitting in front of him, impossible and silent. Why? That was the part that turned his stomach slow. Not the how, though the how was strange enough. The why. People don't clean a stranger's barn for nothing. People don't slip onto a man's property, brush his horses, and slip off again unless they want something, or owe something, or are measuring something. He walked back out into the yard and turned a slow circle. Nothing moved. Only the long blue shadows leaning hard to the east, and the first cold stars pricking through the bruise of the sky. He went around the whole property, hunting for sign. A boot print, a scuffed stone, a bent blade of the dry grass. Any small lie the ground might tell about which way they'd come and which way they'd gone. The packed desert floor gave him nothing. 3 years it had taught him to read this country like a printed page, and now the page had gone blank under his eyes, and that rattled him worse than he wanted to own, because a man can defend against what he can read. Tracks tell you numbers. Numbers tell you how scared to be, but people who leave no tracks at all, those you cannot count, and what you cannot count, you cannot prepare for. Night dropped the way it always did out here. Fast, like a lid coming down over a pot. He cooked his supper plain and ate it plainer, alone at the small table, by the light of a single tallow stub. The bracelet set beside his plate, where his eyes kept drifting back to it. He did not sleep in the main house. The house was a museum of jobs he kept meaning to start and never did. And the barn stayed cooler and asked less of a tired man. So he climbed to his cot up in the loft and lay back and let the long day settle into his shoulders. Last was just reaching for him when he heard it. Footsteps. Soft, but more than 3 now. Many. He came off the cot fully awake. Every nerve stood up straight, crossed to the loft window, looked out, and the breath stopped clean in his throat. Out on the far horizon, low against the black, there were lights. Not one, not two, many. Small points of fire shifting and guttering across the floor of the desert, spread out wide, all of them moving slow. Campfires, torches, people, a whole drifting constellation of them, fallen out of the sky and laid along the ground. And every last one of them was crawling toward his ranch. His heart went to hammering against his ribs. How many? 10, 20, more than that. The 3 women that morning had not been wanderers who stumbled on his well by luck. They had been scouts, sent ahead to find water, to find a man, to read what kind of man he was. The clean barn was not only thanks. It was a report carried back. He gives water. He raises no hand. He is alone. And now whatever they had reported to came drifting toward him out of the dark. And Eli Caldwell had no earthly idea if it meant to thank him or bury him. Have you ever opened your door to a stranger, knowing the kindness might cost you everything you had left? Eli was about to learn, hour by hour, exactly what that costs a man. He did not sleep again. He sat at the loft window with a cup of black coffee going cold and bitter in his fist, his old rifle propped against the boards beside him. Loaded, powder dry, ball seated. He did not touch it, only kept it where his eye could land on it. He wanted no trouble in this world, but he had not lived 3 years in this killing country by being a soft fool, and a man watches the dark when the dark gets up and walks toward his house. The hours dragged like a wagon with a broke wheel. The cold of the desert night crept into his bones, careless of the same sun that had tried to cook him alive at noon. The stars burned with that hard, close brilliance you only ever get far from any lamp or town, and those distant fires held their place out there the whole night through, sometimes seeming to drift a little nearer, sometimes holding dead still, like a row of patient eyes that had settled on him, and felt no hurry at all about what came next. Dawn came up the color of a struck match. Eli came down out of the loft, stiff and grit-eyed but wide awake, and he walked out to the front of his land to meet whatever the night had carried to his gate. And then he saw them. His jaw came loose on its hinge, coming up the dusty track toward his ranch. Walking in a long, ordered line were 25 Apache women. 25. He counted twice and got the same fearful number both times, all young, all moving with the same quiet, ground-eating determination, one foot and then the next, no hurry and no hesitation in any of them. And at the head of the line he saw the 3 from the day before, and his chest did something complicated that he had no name for. They stopped 20 paces off. Nobody spoke. The desert silence pressed down heavier than Eli had ever felt it, and that was a thing to say today for a man who lived buried inside that silence. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. What in the name of God was happening on his land? One of the women near the front stepped forward. She was small, with quick dark eyes that swept his whole property in the time most folks needed just to blink, cataloging the broken fence, the dead garden, the sagging house, missing nothing. When she spoke, her English came clean and unhurried, the words of someone who had learned the tongue carefully and used it with care. My name is Dolly. This is Nasha. She leads us. A pause. She picked the next words the way you pick footing on loose stone. We come in peace. We carry no weapons. We bring no trouble to your door. Eli found his voice. It came out rough as a rasp dragged over iron. There's a lot of you, 25. Dolly did not blink. Yesterday 3 of us came for water. You gave it. No questions. You asked nothing back. Her quick eye settled on his face and stayed. That is a rare thing in this world. We have not found much of it on the road. Eli looked them over, made himself go slow, one face at a time. They were wrecked with exhaustion. Everyone. Clothes torn down to threads. A few of them had their feet wrapped in rag, where the shoes had simply rotted off somewhere behind them. One young one near the back stood with both arms folded careful across her middle, and Eli's eye caught on her a half-second before he made himself look away. They were ruined, all of them. Every chin was up. Not one of them studied the dirt. Where do you come from? Eli said, the small one. Dolly traded a glance with the tall one at the front. Nasha. The leader gave the smallest nod, granting something. And then Dolly told him, and the telling tipped the whole world a few degrees off level. Our people meant to marry us off. To old men, warriors who had buried their wives and wanted new ones to keep their fires burning. Her voice never lifted. Somehow that was worse than if she had wept it. Nobody asked were we willing. They simply decided. So we ran. The quiet that came after sat down on Eli's chest like a flat stone. He looked at the tall one, Nasha. She stood at the head of her ragged column with a stillness that was its own kind of nobility. The dust thick in the black of her hair, her eyes holding his without one flicker of apology. No older than the rest by any count of years, but carrying something they all leaned toward. A weight she had picked up because somebody had to carry it. You ran, Eli said. Lo, we ran. Dolly's chin came up. 3 weeks across this desert. Some nights without water. Many nights without food. She let it land. But we would rather die free than live as somebody's property. We have already proven we mean those words and not just say them. What she did not tell him. What he would not learn until it was nearly too late to do anybody any good. Was that 27 women had walked out of those mountains 3 weeks back. And only 25 had reached his gate. The desert had kept the other 2. The women had dug them down into ground hard as fired brick with their bare and bleeding hands. And then they had stood up. And they had kept walking, because stopping was only another, slower way of dying. Asha spoke then, the first time, in her own tongue, quiet, even. The words rolled out of her steady as water finding its way over stone, and when she finished, Dolly turned them into English without once taking her eyes off Eli. She says, yesterday you gave water to 3 strangers. You did not have to. You could have turned us away. You could have raised your hand to us. Instead, you gave us what we needed and asked nothing in return. Dolly paused for breath. That is why we came back in the dark and cleaned your barn, and that is why we stand at your gate now, not to beg. To repay, Eli's brow nodded. Repay how? What is it you want? We want to settle what we owe. Dolly said it as plain as a fact about the weather. Our way. When a stranger saves your life, you owe them work. You owe them your hands until the debt is square. We looked at your land yesterday, while 3 of us drank. Her eyes traveled again to the fallen fence, the dead garden, the dying house, and came back to him. One man cannot hold all of this. We think you have been losing the fight a long time alone. The words went into Eli sideways, under his guard, and pressed on a bruise he kept covered. We are good workers. Dolly pressed on, sensing the smallest give in him the way a trader senses a man near to buying. We know this desert better than the people who claim to own it. We can pull green out of dirt that other folks have given up for dead. We can build. We can mend. We can weave cloth that turns heads. Let us work your land one season. Then we are gone. The debt is paid, and we go in peace and leave you in peace." Eli scrubbed both hands down his face. This was madness laid out plain in the morning sun. 25 Apache women on his ranch. Dry Hollow 3 days off. News has long legs. And what would the town do? What would it bring down on all their heads? He thought of the sheriff, the talk, the trouble, all of it lining up behind this one choice, like a row of dominoes set on end and waiting for the first push. But then he looked at them again. And he saw it, plain as the sun climbing the sky behind them. Desperation and hope braided so tight together that you could not pull the one loose without tearing the other. The exact thing he had carried in his own chest 3 years back, when he rode into this forsaken nowhere, with nothing behind him but fresh graves and a need to start over so fierce it had kept his heart beating when nothing else could. He knew that look from the inside. He had been that look once. "How long?" he said at last. Dully leaned to Nasha, murmured, listened, turned back. "As long as it takes to pay the debt. A month, maybe 2. We work hard, we make no trouble, and then we are gone like we were never here at all." Eli looked around his ruined kingdom, the fences begging for wire, the garden he'd fought 2 summers to wake and lost both times, house folding in on itself because he had never once had the heart or the hours to save it. The barn far too big for one broken man. "Where would you sleep?" he said. The barn. Dolly had the answer ready before the question was cool. "We saw you live in it. It is big. There is room enough. We will keep to ourselves. You will hardly know we are there." "The barn's mine," Eli said, flat as the floor. Disappointment crossed their faces like the shadow of a cloud. Quick. Then, schooled away by women, long practiced at swallowing letdown. And then Eli heard himself keep talking, and some cool back part of him stood off to the side and watched it happen with mild astonishment. "You can have it. I'll move into the house. It's well past time I fixed the cursed thing anyhow." A ripple of surprise ran down the whole line of women. Nasha spoke again, and, this time when Dolly put it into English, there was the ghost of a smile riding under the words. "She says you are a strange man, a good one." Eli almost gave the smile back. "Almost. She's likely right I'm crazy, but she's right on the other count too. I can't hold this place alone. You want to work? Then work. But there's rules, and we set them now, before anybody unrolls a blanket." "We are listening," Dolly said. First, he raised a finger. "Nobody sets foot inside my house without I say so. Not to clean it, not to bring me coffee, not for anything." "That door's mine," Dolly put it into Apache. Heads nodded down the line, a second finger. "The well is shared, but every drop gets used like it's the last one. I catch anybody letting water run to waste. We are finished, debt or no debt. Out here, water is the difference between a ranch and a grave." A second wave of nods, faster this time, and Eli understood from how fast they came that these were women who needed no lecture on the worth of water. They had buried friends for the lack of it. Third, here his voice dropped and went hard, and he made certain his eye touched every face that could follow his English. "Anybody rides out from that town asking questions? You did not run from anything, ever. You're hired hands. I brought you on because the place got too big for one set of hands. That is the whole and only story. You understand me? Every one of you." Dolly rendered it rapid and low. 25 women nodded as one body. "Then I guess you've got yourselves both works, yeah," he said, and something in his chest eased a half-turn looser even as the rest of him braced hard for the cost. "Barn's yours. I'll haul blankets over from the house. And welcome, I suppose." God helped the lot of us. He had not finished the last word before they scattered like water, flung across a slope. No orders given, no discussion needed. They simply broke into groups and flowed to the corners of his land as though each woman had been handed her task in a dream the night before. Some went straight for the downed fence line, some for the dead garden. A knot of them circled the barn, studying it from the outside the way a doctor circles a patient, reading the wound before touching it. And Eli Caldwell stood rooted in the middle of his own yard, more lost on his own property than he had been on the day he first rode onto it, watching his solitary life come apart and rearrange itself into something he had no name for yet. The small one came back to him. Dolly. She stopped close and looked up, those quick eyes gone briefly, unexpectedly still. "Thank you," she said. "Just that. You do not know what this means to us. You cannot. Hope I don't live to regret it," Eli muttered, watching the others move with a speed and a sureness that made his head go light. But, even as he said it, he knew the regret was not the part he feared. What he feared, standing there in the wreck of his own solitude, was how badly some starved corner of him had already started to hope. They worked like nothing Eli had ever witnessed. 10 of the women went to the broken fence on the east line, and they moved it in a rhythm so smooth. It looked rehearsed in some other life. Some held the posts plumb while others lashed the wire fast, with quick, sure fingers, and they barely spoke, passing the labor between them on nothing but a glance and a tilt of the head. Eli had fought that same stretch of fence, alone for the better part of a season, and lost ground every week. They ate through it before the sun cleared the rooftop. Another 8 surrounded the dead garden. They knelt in the cracked dirt and laid their bare palms flat against it, feeling it, reading it like the ground might confess its troubles if only somebody bothered to listen close. One drew a small drawstring pouch from her waist and shook seed into her hand. Another began scratching shallow channels with her fingers, laying out a pattern Eli did not recognize, curved and clever, built to catch and hold whatever little water the sky ever saw fit to give. The last 7 were inside the barn, and through the open door came the scrape of brooms, and, beneath it, a thing that stopped him where he stood, singing, soft, low, a melody in a tongue he did not own, floating out into the hot, bright morning. And it was so plainly the sound of people who could finally set down a weight they'd hauled too long and too far that it put an ache in his throat. He had not expected and did not know where to put. He turned away, before any of them could catch his face doing something he'd be ashamed of. By the time the sun stood straight up, the place had changed past what he could have managed in a month of his own sweat. The east fence ran whole and tight. The garden lay turned and channeled. Dark furrows opened and waiting on the seed. The barn was swept and squared and put right. He leaned in the thin shade of the house with a tin cup going warm in his fist and asked himself, not for the first time that strange day, whether he had fallen asleep at his fence and dreamed the lot of them. Nasha came to him across the yard, Dolly a step behind to ferry the words. She asks if you have more tools. Hammers, nails, cut wood, shed out back. Eli pointed his cup at the lean-to slumped behind the house. It's all old. Half of it's rusted down to nothing useful. Dolly passed it along. Nasha nodded once and walked for the shed, and minutes later, 3 women came out, hauling tools. Eli had honestly forgotten he owned, blowing the dust off them, testing the edges against their thumbs, putting them straight to work as if rust were a thing that could be shamed out of iron. It was somewhere in that long, strange afternoon, watching a woman he could not name coax his seized hand plane back to life against a length of grayed board, that Eli let himself feel the full size of what he had done. He had let 25 strangers onto his land, strangers the world was hunting, if their story held true, and every bone in him said it did. He had tilted his own future for the sake of a feeling in his chest, and a wiser man would have pointed them south and gone back to his fence. He had never once claimed to be a wise man, only a stubborn one, and stubborn had kept him alive when wise would have laid down and quit. That night, after the stores were carried in and the blankets hauled across, and the barn had gone quiet, Eli could not sleep in his own house. The walls felt too close after 3 years of open loft. So he sat on the porch step he'd swept clean that afternoon, and he watched the soft light flicker in the barn windows, and he listened to the low talk and the lower laughter of women who could finally rest without one ear cocked for the sound of horses. That was when he saw the young one slip out, the one who folded her arms over her middle. She came out into the dark alone and stood a moment with her face tipped up to the stars, and her hands went to her belly in a way that was not folding now but cradling, and Eli understood a thing he had half seen all day and not let himself name. She was with child. Out here, 3 weeks of desert behind her, and God knew what ahead. An older woman came out after her, gray-haired, slow on her feet, and she went to the girl and put an arm around her and murmured something that bent the girl's head down onto her shoulder. The old one looked up then, across the dark yard, and her eyes found Eli on his step. She did not startle. She only held his gaze a long moment, and Eli understood that he had just been let in on a secret and that the price of being let in was that he was now expected to keep it. He dipped his head. Once. A promise made without a word. The old woman nodded back, satisfied, and steered the girl inside. But the next morning brought a heavier secret, and this one Dolly carried to him unasked, while the others were still at the well drawing the day's first water. "There is a thing you should know," Dolly said, low, "if you mean to keep us. A thing that changes the size of the risk." Eli set down the saddle he'd been mending. "Say it." "Nasha is not only a woman who ran," Dolly's quick eyes went, for once, uncertain. "She is the daughter of a chief. Her marriage was not one old man's wish to fill an empty fire. It was the seal and a peace between two peoples who have spilled each other's blood longer than anyone living can remember. The morning seemed to still around the two of them. And she ran from it," Eli said. "She ran from it." Dolly's voice dropped lower yet. "Which means the men hunting us do not only want their brides back. They are trying to mend a treaty that tore the night she left. If they do not bring her home, the peace fails. And if the peace fails, men die. Many men on both sides." She looked at him, steady and grave. "So you see what you have truly done, Eli Caldwell. You did not shelter 25 tired women. You stepped your own body between two nations standing at the edge of a war." Ellie looked across the yard to where Nasha stood at the well, drawing water with the same careful economy as all the rest, her back straight, her face calm, carrying that weight she had never once set down. And he understood now what he had read in her at the gate and could not place. Not just a leader, a daughter who had counted the cost of her own freedom in other people's lives and had chosen it anyway, and now lived every hour inside that arithmetic. "You should have told me at the gate," he said. "But there was no heat in it. Would you have given the water?" Dolly asked quietly. If you had known it might buy a war. He thought about that honestly, turned it over the way he turned the bracelet, and gave her the only answer he had. The water was the water. The rest is just the shape of what grew out of it. A man can't unpour a cup because he's scared of what it waters. When Dolly put that to Nasha later, the chief's daughter looked across the yard at Eli for a long moment and said nothing at all. But something in her face shifted, the way hard ground shifts when the first deep root finally takes hold beneath it. A week on, the ranch had come so far back to life that Eli scarcely knew it. But 26 mouths emptied his stores faster than one ever had. The well ran deep and generous. The flour did not. By the end of that first week, the beans were low, and the salt was nearly gone. And Eli knew there was nothing for it but the road. "I've got to go to town," he told Dolly on a gray morning, the words tasting of trouble before they'd left him. Flour, beans, salt. The plain things. "We're near scraped out." Dolly carried it to Nasha, who nodded her understanding and asked, through Dolly, how long he would be gone. 3 days out, 3 back. A day there, if the buying goes quick. Eli rubbed the back of his neck. 6, 7 days. You all hold together here on your own that long. Nasha's answer came back wearing the edge of a smile. She says they survived 3 weeks in the open with nothing but each other. A few days here, with water and a roof and a fence that holds, will feel like a holiday. Eli almost grinned at that. He went to ready the horse and the mule for the load, and before he swung up, he found Dolly one more time and held her eye until he was certain she had it whole. "Anybody comes while I'm gone. Anybody at all. You tell them I hired you. You're ranch hands. You came up from some settlement a long way off. You don't remember the name. It's not their business. Nothing past that. And no Apache spoken where a stranger's ear can catch it." "Understood," Dolly said. He rode out into a hard, bright morning, with the mule plodding on a lead behind him, and he used the long, empty hours of that first day to turn the problem over and over, the way you worry a stone smooth in your pocket. The truth was a knot with no clean end to pull. 25 Apache women fleeing forced marriages was exactly the kind of story that brought men with rifles, and Eli rode east knowing that the simple act of buying double the flour would set a question in somebody's mouth. And out here, questions had a way of ripening into suspicions, and suspicions into the kind of trouble a man did not walk back from. He camped that first night without a fire, the cold settling into him like an old debt come due, sleeping with one eye cracked toward the dark. The second night, the same. He pushed the horse and the mule harder than was kind, and did not look over his shoulder as often as he wanted to, 'cause a man who keeps glancing back tells anyone watching exactly the measure of his fear. The land changed slow as he went. The deep desert gave way by degrees to scrub, and then to the broken country where the trail to Dry Hollow ran. And on the morning of the third day he saw the town rise out of the heat shimmer ahead of him, a smudge of weathered wood that resolved, mile by mile, it into a single street and a clutch of buildings leaning tired into the wind. He felt the town watching him before he saw a single face. That was Dry Hollow. A place with little to do but mind everybody else's business, and it did the minding with the devotion of men starved for occupation. Curtains shifted as he passed. A boy stopped his game in the dust to stare. By the time Eli tied off in front of the general store, he could feel the word already traveling ahead of him down the street, the way smoke travels ahead of the fire that makes it. Caldwell's back. 3 days early on his usual. Wonder what's changed out there. He told himself it meant nothing. He had bought supplies in this town for 3 years. One early trip was not a crime, but his hands looping the reins were not quite steady, and Eli noticed it, and hated that he noticed it, because a man whose hands give him away has already lost the first hand of the game. He drew a breath, settled himself, and pushed through the door into the dim. Abner ran the place, a broad man with a gray mustache and a belly that arrived a half-second before the rest of him, and he greeted Eli from behind the counter like a man welcoming back somebody he'd already half-buried. "Caldwell. We about decided the desert finally ate you, Still chewing, Eli set a folded list on the counter. Need all that. Double the usual on the staples. Abner's eyebrows climbed his forehead as he read, double. You got company out there now. Eli kept his face flat as a dry creek bed. Hired help. Place got too big for one set of hands. Help. Abner leaned an elbow on the counter and the scent of a story came into his eyes. Who in their right mind signs on to work 3 days from the nearest anything? Folks that need the work, Eli said. Can you fill the list or not? Abner could, and he set to it, scooping flour and weighing beans onto the scale. But the bell over the door had already begun to ring, the way it always rang once word got walking, and men drifted in 1 and 2 at a time, the way men do when something has finally arrived worth drifting toward. Eli knew the faces. Tom Harlan, who ran cattle on the North Range. Briggs the blacksmith, a slab of a man with 4 arms like fence rails. And, last through the door, easy and unhurried, Reed Coker. Eli's gut pulled tight the moment Coker came in. He could not have told you why. Coker was lean and loose-jointed, a smile always half-built and never quite finished on his mouth, and he had a way of looking at a man like he was already toting up what could be pried loose and carried off. Heard you took on hands, Tom said. No warmth spent on the way in. How many? Enough to keep the place upright, Eli said, and hoisted the first sack onto his shoulder and carried it out into the heat, hoping the talk might follow him and wither there. It did not. From where, though? That was Coker, his voice gone soft in a way that did not match the hard arithmetic in his eyes. We're all of us short of hands out here. Nobody's got spare bodies to lend a man 3 days off the edge of the map. Got lucky, Eli said. Lucky? Coker turned the word over slow, tasting it for the lie folded up inside. Funny kind of luck, that. Falls out of the sky, does it? Briggs the blacksmith folded his great arms. We're not aiming to crowd your business, Caldwell. But strangers out here are everybody's business, like it or not. You bring folks in. This town's got a right to know whose buckets are going down our water. And there it was. The water. Eli had known it would come. And here it came, right on its mark. They're honest workers, Eli said, even giving back not 1 inch. They keep to themselves. They work hard. That's the whole of what a man needs to know about another man. And it's the whole of what you need to know about these. But who are they? Coker pressed, stepping in a pace closer, that half-smile never finishing its journey. People who needed a clean start, Eli said, and set the words down like fence posts. Same as me when I first rode in. Same as half the souls in this town. You go back far enough and ask honest. Tom Harlan nodded slow at that, granting it the way a fair man grants a true thing he'd rather not. Fair enough, but you see the worry plain, Eli. Water runs thin in this country. Your spread sits on the only deep well for 30 miles in any direction. More buckets going down it. And there was the real fear, stripped bare under all the rest of it. Not who, how many, how much would be left for every family downhill of his fence when the dry months bared their teeth. The well's fine, Eli said, hasn't dropped 2 foot in 3 years. Worst summer I ever saw out here, it held its water without complaint. For how many, though? Tom's eyes stayed level on him, patient and unmoving. That's the question under the question, isn't it? How many hands did you take on, Eli? The store went quiet. Every man in it waited on the number, and the number was the one thing Eli could not give them. Enough, he said. And the water's fine. Anybody that frets over it that bad, you're welcome to ride out and put your own eyes on the well. Maybe we'll just do that, Coker said, light as a feather laid on a scale, and somehow it landed like a fist. Briggs raised one thick hand to settle the room. Easy, the both of you. Eli's a straight dealer, always has been. He says the water's good, then I'll take his word. He turned his slab of a face to Eli, and it was not unkind. But you understand why folks go nervy. This whole town lives or dies on water. Families do. Children do. A man hears more mouths, he hears less for mine. That's not meanness. That's just thirst doing the thinking. I understand it, Eli said. I'm telling every man in this room I'd not put one child of yours and want to keep my own place green. My ranch carries itself. It always has. Abner cinched the last sack and named the price. And then, mild as fresh milk, he added the thing that put a fine crack in the whole afternoon. That's a powerful lot of food, Eli. More than 2 or 3 hired hands put away in a month of Sundays. Eli paid it without a word, loaded the rest onto the patient mule, and made ready to ride. But Tom Harlan caught him at the rail before his boot found the stirrup. One more thing, and then I'll let you be. The sheriff came around asking after you. Week back, Ellie's heart kicked once, hard, against his ribs. His face gave away nothing. Sheriff. Asking what? Reports of strange folks moving through the deep desert. A band of Apache women that lit out from their people up north. Their chiefs hunting them, and hunting hard. By what comes down the wire, Tom watched him close as a card player. You see anything like that out your way? Eli held the man's gaze and lied with every inch of his body. Desert's a wide thing. I see coyotes, rattlers, the odd hawk riding the heat. Nothing that walks on 2 legs. Tom nodded slow. All right then, sheriff just wants word sent if anything turns up. You'll send it? I'll keep it in mind, Eli said, and put his boot up, and rode out of Dry Hollow, feeling a dozen pairs of eyes ride right out of town with him. What no one in that dim store could have guessed, while they haggled over flour and weighed out their fears about the water, was that the women they were so quick to dread had laid 2 of their own into the open sand just to reach Eli's gate. That they had walked until the shoes dissolved off their feet. That fear of these women was the cheapest, easiest thing in all the world to sell to a frightened town. And one man in that store started doing the sums on exactly what such fear might be worth, because Reed Coker did not ride home when the others did. He let Eli get clear of town, watched him go from the shade of the saloon porch, that half smile finally finishing on his mouth, now that no one was looking, and then he saddled up, slow and easy, and pointed his horse west, and followed the fresh tracks of a mule carrying double its usual load. He kept well back. A day's dust between them, no more. Coker had hunted strays and men both in his time, and he knew how to follow a trail without becoming one. He camped cold when Eli camped cold. He moved when Eli moved. And on the morning Eli's ranch finally rose up out of the flat ahead, green and mended, and impossibly alive in all that dead country, Reed Coker lay on his belly atop a low rise to the south and watched it through a brass spyglass. He'd won off a drunk freighter 2 winters back. He saw the fences, whole and tight. He saw the garden, growing in clever curved rows no white man's hand would ever have laid out. He saw the barn, swept and squared. And then he saw the women, not 3. Not the handful a man might hire. He counted them as they came, and went from the well and the workshop, his lips moving, and the number he reached made his breath go quick and shallow in the dust. More than 20. Apache, every one, plain as paint even at that distance, in the way they moved and dressed and held themselves. And Reed Coker, lying on that rise, understood all at once exactly what he was looking at. He was looking at money, because there was a reward standing for these women's return. The whole town had heard it come down the wire, and there was a tribe up north that would empty its lodges of hides and silver to have them back, treaty or no treaty, and there was a town below that would pay in gratitude and standing to have the Apache threat cleared off its only good well. 3 buyers. one secret, and Reed Coker, holding the only thing every one of them wanted, which was knowing precisely where the women had gone to ground. What made it richer, still, was the history he carried that Eli knew nothing of. 2 winters back, when the game ran thin and the army watched the high trails, Coker had run rifles and horses up into those same mountains and traded them quiet for hides and worked silver. The tribe knew his face. Some of the warriors had taken his guns into their own hands, which meant that when Coker came to them with word of where their runaways had gone, they would not see a stranger spinning a tale for his own gain. They would see a man they had already dealt with, a man whose word had weight, because coin had already passed between them, and a debt of coin is the one bond such men never think to question. He could sell the same secret twice, maybe 3 times. He meant to try for all of it. Coker slid back off the rise on his elbows, careful as a snake, and went down to where his horse waited in the wash. He did not point it toward town. He turned its head north and east, toward the high country, and the lodges, and the men who owed him, and he rode off with the spyglass cold against his ribs, and that finished smile sitting easy on his mouth at last. He had come into this country with nothing. 3 years of failing at everything an honest man could fail at. And now, by the dumb luck of a double order of flour, Reed Coker held a thing that desperate, powerful people would beggar themselves to buy. He was not going to waste it. He was going to milk it down to the last drop and let the men he sold it to do the bleeding for him. Behind him, all unknowing, the ranch went on with its evening. The women drew the last water. The horses were brushed, and Eli Caldwell rode the final miles home toward the only thing in 3 years that had made him feel less alone, carrying flour and salt, and not the first inkling that a man with a spyglass had counted his secret one by one and ridden off to sell it. Tipcum 3. Section 9-12. Eli reached the ranch at dusk on the 3rd day back, and the women met him with a relief that caught him off guard, crowding the yard. Dolly halved to his stirrup before the horse had fully stopped. We worried. We thought maybe the road gave you trouble. Town gave me trouble enough. Eli swung down stiff and started hauling sacks. They're asking after the water, and the sheriff's hunting Apache women that ran from a tribe up north. Words all over Dry Hollow. The color drained out of Dolly's face. She turned and put it fast into Apache, and Nasha, who had come up behind her without a whisper of sound, took the news with a stillness that was somehow louder than any cry would have been. "What did you tell them?" Dolly asked. "That I hired hands. Nothing past that." Eli looked across the gathered faces, lit gold by the last of the light. "But they're not fools, and they can count sacks of flour. They smell something out here. From here on, every one of you stays sharp. Anybody rides in, you fade, and you let me do the talking." That should have been the worst of it for a while. It was not, because 3 days later, the test came riding out of the east, and it did not come from the town at all. Ellie was up on the roof of the house, working at the patching he'd been promising himself for 2 years when he saw the dust climb out of the flat. Riders, several, coming on fast and straight at the ranch, with the purpose of men who knew exactly where they were going and meant to be there soon. Dolly, his voice cracked down across the yard. Riders, east. What happened next was a thing to behold. The women did not panic. They did the opposite. They dissolved into the barn, behind doors, around the blind corners of the outbuildings, gone so fast and so quiet that within the space of 10 breaths the whole ranch stood empty, but for Eli on his roof, and the wash hanging dead, still on the line. 5 riders came on. Not townsmen. Eli knew it before he could make out a single face, knew it in the way they sat their horses and the hard cut of them against the bright sky. When they drew close enough, his stomach pulled itself into a fist. Apache warriors. Young men, faces marked with paint, weapons worn open and easy. They reined up 20 paces off, and the one at the center walked his horse a single step forward. Tall. A pale scar ran down the left side of his face, old and clean, the kind of mark a man wears like his own signature. We look for women. His English came heavy and deliberate, each word set down like a stone laid in a wall. 25. From our people. You have seen them. Eli came down off the roof slow, hands held wide and open where they could be watched the whole way. This is private land. Who's asking after them? I am Tarek. The scarred man's eyes moved over the place as he spoke. These women stole from our people. They broke the promises made for them. They owe their lives to the men who waited. Haven't seen a soul, Eli said, level as still water. I live out here alone. Tarek's gaze had stopped roving. It had landed on the fences, whole and tight. On the garden, green and laid out in those curving clever rows. On the barn, swept and squared and trying far too hard to look empty. Your land is well kept, Tarek said. For a man who lives alone, I work hard, no. Tarek swung down off his horse, and the four behind him followed, boots hitting dust in a loose and widening ring. This is the work of many hands, women's hands, by the rows in that garden. Where are they, man who lives alone, told you? I've got no workers. Tarek started walking for the barn. Then you will not mind that we look inside. Eli moved, put his own body square in the man's path, and the desert seemed to draw a breath and hold it around the two of them. I do mind. This is my land. You've got no right to walk into my barn. The four warriors went taut all at once. Hands drifted toward knife hilts. The whole afternoon balanced itself on a blade's edge, and Eli stood at the center of it, with nothing but his own unarmed body, between 5 fighting men and the barn, and he understood with a terrible clarity that he might die in the next breath over a choice he had made in 5 seconds at a well. He did not step back. He had stepped back once, 3 years gone, from a thing he could not fight, and he had crawled out of that surrender barely alive. Something in him had never learned how to do it again. Then the barn door opened. Nasha walked out. Head up, spine straight, every line of her refusing the fear that any sane person would have felt with 5 armed men in the yard. And behind her, one by one, the rest came out and formed a line at her back, and not a single one of them looked away or looked down. Tarek's mouth bent into a thing that was not quite a smile. There. I knew it. Nasha spoke first, fast and hard in their shared tongue, and Tarek gave it back just as hard. And the two of them went at it, voices climbing, the warriors behind him, shifting their weight from boot to boot. Eli could follow none of the words and did not need to. He could read the shape of the thing plain enough. A demand. A refusal. A line scratched in the dirt between two people who had known each other a long time and now stood on opposite sides of something neither would step across. Dolly moved to Eli's shoulder and fed him the pieces under her breath. He says we must come back, that we belong to the tribe, that the men who waited paid the bride price for us in good faith. And her answer, she says we are not property to be paid for, that we refused these marriages with our own mouths, that we choose our own road now, and no man chooses it for us. Tarek turned then and spoke straight at Eli, switching to English so there could be no mistaking his meaning. These women are trouble, white man. They will bring you nothing but grief. Hand them over now, and you keep your life and your land both. No, Eli said. One word dropped flat into the dirt between them. The warriors traded glances, plainly thrown by it. Tarek's eyes narrowed to slits. What did you say to me? I said no. They're here because they want to be here. I'm not handing a single one of them over to anybody. It is not your choice to make, rancher. On my land, Eli said. It surely is. Tarak took a step in, his hand settling slow on the hilt at his hip. You are one man, we are 5. They carry no weapons among them. Tell me how you mean to stop us. Eli did not give back the step. You can try it. But it won't go clean for anybody standing here. Not you, not them, not me. You'll spend good men taking by force what you could have ridden away from whole. And for what? To drag women home who'll only run again the first night you sleep. The tension drew so tight that not one soul in the yard seemed to dare a breath. And then Nasha spoke again. Different this time. Lower. The heat gone clean out of it, and something older and far heavier laid down in its place. Tarak listened, and Eli watched the man's hard face travel slow off its rage and onto something more tangled, harder to put a name to. When she finished, Tarak stood silent a long while. The wind picked at the painted lines on his face. At last he answered, and Dolly breathed the meaning of it into Eli's ear. She reminded him of the old ways, the ways before the white men came and changed the shape of everything. In those days, she says, an Apache woman had a voice of her own. She could refuse a marriage. She could choose the man, or choose no man. She could walk her own road, and the people honored it. Dolly's voice came unsteady. And then she asked him. She asked him when his own people decided to become like the very men who caged them, and they decided a woman was a thing to be spent for peace, the way the white man spends them. Tarak looked at the long line of women, then at Eli, then back to Nasha, his oldest trouble standing free in a white man's yard. And something in him gave way, though it cost him visibly to let it go. If they are here by their own choosing, he said, slow, the words dragged up out of him one at a time, and if this man does not hold them by force, then we cannot take them. The old ways forbid it, and I will not be the one to spit on them. His eyes hardened again, fast as a door swinging shut. But hear me, white man. This is not finished, and do not let yourself believe it is. Her father is not a man who bends the way I bend tonight. The piece was bought with her hand, and the piece is bleeding now every day she stays gone. How long? Eli asked. 30 days. Tarak swung back up onto his horse in one clean motion. I will go back and tell them what I have seen with my own eyes, that the women live free, by their own want under one man's roof. It will buy you 30 days, no more than that. After 30 days, others will come. Men who do not remember the old ways and do not care to. Men who care only that the treaty holds, and the chief's daughter sleeps where she was promised. He looked down at Eli, and the warning in it came close to a kindness. Use the days well, white man, and keep them safe inside that fence. If you fail them, you will not need to come looking for us. We will already be at your gate. The 5 riders wheeled their horses as one, and rode east, their shapes thinning into the shimmer until the desert drank them down. When they were gone, Eli's legs nearly buckled under him. He sat down hard on the porch step. The women came to him slow, and Nasha knelt in front of him and set a hand on his shoulder and spoke soft. And Dolly, with wet eyes, gave it over to him. She says thank you. She says she has seen many men hold a weapon. She has never before seen a man hold a line with empty hands. She says you are a warrior who needs no knife. Eli looked at the faces ringed around him, and for the first time he let himself feel how completely his life had braided itself into theirs in the span of 2 short weeks. We're a team now, he said. Rough, it ever comes. We stand for each other, all of us, or none. For the first time since they had walked up out of the desert, every woman in that yard smiled. But 30 days is a short length of rope, and not every danger wore a painted face, and announced itself at 20 paces. The days that followed had a brightness to them that Eli mistook, for a while, for safety. The garden came in heavy, the vines loading down with fruit no one had believed that dead dirt could carry, tomatoes red as struck coals, squash going fat in the shade of their own leaves, beans climbing the staked poles in green spirals. The women had done a thing with that ground that 2 years of Eli's own sweat had never come close to, coaxing life out of it with old knowledge and patient hands, and Eli took to standing at the garden's edge in the evenings just to look at it, the way a man looks at proof that the world is not done with him yet. And in those bright days, the thing that had been growing quiet between him and Nasha came up out of the ground the way the garden had. Slow, and then, all at once, it was nothing a man could point to and name, a hand steadying a beam she lifted. A look held a half-second past where the work required it. The two of them on the porch in the dark, long after the others slept, saying less and less to each other, because the silence had taken over the saying. He had buried his heart 3 years back in ground he swore he would never disturb again. And here it was, against all his sense and all his rules, pushing pale green shoots up through the packed dirt of him. One night, with the others asleep, and the stars thick as spilled salt overhead, the words came out of him hard and unpracticed. "My wife," he said, "and my boy." Fever took them both inside a single week. I sat between their two beds, and I couldn't do one solid thing but watch it happen. He stared out at the black rim of the desert. I came out here after, to the emptiest place on the map I could find, to stop feeling it. 3 years I managed the trick. And then you walked up to my well with 2 strangers and asked for water. Nasha understood more of his English now than she ever let on. She reached over in the dark and laid her hand over his, calloused and certain, and she did not wait for Dolly to carry what came next. "You feel it now," she said, slow and careful in his own tongue. "That is good. Dead men feel nothing. The grief is the proof. You are not dead, Eli Caldwell. You only buried yourself early." It was the truest thing anyone had said to him in 3 years, and it undid something in his chest. He had spent all that time bolting shut. The old woman saw it. Kaya saw most things. She had been a healer among her people for 40 years, and she had a way of sitting still in a corner of the yard with her hands working at a basket, and her eyes working quietly at everything else. It was Kaya who had steadied the young one, Nita, through the worst nights of the crossing. Kaya who had known, before the girl breathed a word to anyone, what she carried, folded careful under her crossed arms. Kaya who had decided the secret was the girl's own to tell and no one else's, and had kept it close as her own pulse. She was not only watchful. She was kind in the flinty, unsentimental way of the very old. When one of the younger women cut her hand badly on the wire, it was Kaya who packed the wound with a poultice of mashed root and bound it tight, and the cut closed clean without fever. When the nights turned cold, it was Kaya who showed the others how to bank the cook fire so its warmth held till dawn. She moved slow, and she spoke little, and the whole camp turned toward her without seeming to know they did it, the way a room turns toward its only window. She watched Eli and Nasha across the fire-lit yard one evening, and she said something low to the woman beside her, and the woman laughed soft into her hand, and Eli, not following, asked Dolly what the joke had been. Dolly's mouth twitched. "Kaya says the well gave water to 3 strangers, and somehow the whole desert came walking to drink. She says it is a strange thing, what one cup of kindness can grow into, if a man is foolish enough to give it freely. She always can riddles? Only when she is right," Dolly said, "which is most of the time. It makes her tiresome to argue with." Eli let it go with a half-law. He should not have. 'Cause folded up inside the old woman's riddle was a warning, had he only had the ears to catch it, that a thing which grows large enough to shelter 26 souls grows large enough to be seen from a long way off. That kindness, once it puts down roots and starts to bear fruit, throws a shadow across the land. And out there beyond the firelight, in the dark past the mended fence, men were already riding toward that shadow from 2 directions at once, carrying between them everything a man would need to burn the whole of it down to ash. But that night, Eli only saw the firelight, and the woman beside him, and the small, impossible garden, growing green out of dead ground. He let himself believe, for one evening, that the worst had already come and gone at 20 paces, and ridden away east. The 30 days ran out the way water runs out of a cracked jar. Quiet, steady, a little faster near the end than a man expects. The fire came in the blackest part of the night, when even the desert seemed to have stopped breathing. Ellie woke to the smell of it first. Smoke, sharp and wrong, where there should have been only the cold mineral scent of the dark hours. He was up and moving before his mind had finished naming the thing, boots on, out the door, and the sight that met him in the yard stopped his heart cold in his chest. The grain store was burning. Flames clawed up the side of it, orange and ravenous, throwing a hellish flickering light across the whole ranch, and the dry cured wood was going up like it had been waiting its whole life for the match. And it had been helped along. Eli saw that even as he ran for it, the dark wet glisten of oil thrown up the boards, catching the firelight. The deliberate work of a hand that had meant the blaze to catch fast and hold and not be beaten back. Water. His voice tore raw out of him. The buckets. The line. Now, the women were already coming, pouring out of the barn half-dressed and wide awake. And what happened next was not panic, but its hard opposite. They formed a line to the well without a single word passing between them. Hands to handles, buckets swinging up and along and into the fire's red mouth, and through wild minutes, Eli let himself believe they might beat the thing back. Until a scream came from inside the burning store. His blood went to ice in his veins. Who's in there? Is in there? Dolly's face came apart. Nita. She went in for the looms, the new cloth, the season's weaving, before any of us knew the fire was set. The girl, the young one with her arms always folded careful over the child she carried. Inside a building that was eating itself alive, Eli did not think. Thinking would have stopped him cold. He snatched a soaked blanket off the bucket line and threw it over his head and shoulders, and went straight in through the wall of heat. The whole world turned to roar and choke and stinging blind. Smoke like a fist rammed down his throat. The crack and groan of timbers giving up their strength overhead. He shouted the girl's name and got back only the fire's answer. And then the old woman pushed past him, Kaya. 40 years a healer, slow on her feet in plain daylight, and somehow ahead of him now in the smoke, a wet cloth, clamped over her face, moving into the burning dark like a woman who had made her peace with it long ago. She knew the belly of that store better than Eli ever had. She found the girl where his streaming eyes could find nothing, crumpled by the silent looms, overcome by the smoke. And Kaya got her thin, old hands under Nita's arms and shoved her bodily toward the gray smear that was the doorway, with a strength that had no business living in a body that small and that old. Go. A single word of English she had ever spoken to him, torn out through the smoke. Go. Ellie caught Nita as she stumbled clear of the smoke and dragged her out into the night and the clean air, and the women swarmed in around them, pulling girl back from the heat. And Eli turned to go back in for Kaya. The roof came down, folded in on itself, with a sound like the end of the world cracking open. a great rolling gout of sparks, vomiting straight up into the black sky, and the doorway he had just hauled Nita through was simply gone. A solid wall of fire stood where a way out had been one breath before. No. Eli threw himself bodily at it, and hands caught him, many hands, hauling him back as the heat seared the skin of his face. Let me, Kaya, let me, go. She did not come out. They watched the grain store burn down to its black bones, and there was nothing in any of them, not the strength of all of them together, that could do one single thing about it. When the flames finally guttered down toward dawn, they found her where the fallen roof had pinned her, close to the door, close enough that in her last seconds she had not run for her own life, but had stopped and turned and made certain the girl and the unborn child were clear of the smoke before she let the dark take her. The desert sun came up on a ranch that now had a grave to dig. They buried Kaya in the hard ground beyond the garden she had helped wake from the dead, and the women sang her down in their own tongue. The sound was so full of loss that Eli, who did not own a single word of the language, understood the whole of it. Grief needs no translation. It is the one speech every soul is born already knowing. Nita knelt at the grave's edge with her hands no longer folded over her secret, but pressed flat to the turned earth, as if she could push some last warmth down through it to the woman who had spent her final breath keeping her in the world. And when at last the girl rose, the thing she had hidden since the first morning was hidden no longer. The curve of her stood plain in the daylight, and no one looked away from it, and no one spoke a hard word against it, because the old woman who had guarded that secret for 3 weeks of desert and 3 weeks' safety had just given her life to keep both the girl and the small new life inside her breathing. Eli stood at the foot of the grave with the smell of smoke still soaked into his clothes, and he felt the rage in him cool and harden into something colder and more useful than rage. This wasn't the fire being careless, he said, low and certain. Somebody threw oil up the side of my grain store and put a match to it to drive us off this land. An old woman is in the ground because of it. Nasha met his eyes across the raw earth, and Dolly put her quiet fury into English. She asks, "Who hates us this much? Who hates 25 tired women enough to murder a grandmother over it?" Eli already knew. He had known it the instant he saw the oil shine on the boards in the firelight. He thought of a lean man in a dim store with a smile that never finished, asking him how many, where from, who, Reed Coker, who had come sniffing around the question of the women in town and had found something in the answer he could sell and meant now to clear every obstacle off the board before he collected his price. But knowing a thing and proving it were 2 different deserts to walk across, and grief had made the women fragile in a way that 3 weeks of dying in the open never had. That was the cruelty hidden inside it. They had survived the thing that should have killed them. And now, safe, with roots in the ground and bread in the store, they had finally been handed something soft enough to break them. 2 of the women came to Eli that evening, and through Dolly they said they wished to leave, that the ranch was cursed ground, that Kaya's death was a sign they had stayed too long in one place, and the only way to stop the dying was to scatter back into the desert and become hard to find again. It would have been the end of everything, right there at the graveside, if Eli had let stand unanswered. So he gathered all of them at the grave in the failing evening light. He was not a man who made speeches, never had been, had gone whole years saying almost nothing to anyone. But he made one then, because there was no one else left standing to make it. "I'm not going to tell you to stay," he said, and waited for Dolly to carry it across. "I've got no right to ask it. You've paid more for this patch of dirt than I ever did or ever could. You put two of your own into the ground and getting. Here and now a third lies beyond that garden. And I won't stand at her grave and pretend. I know the weight of what that costs you. He looked at each of them, made himself go slow, but I'll tell you what running buys a person. I know, because I bought it. 3 years back I ran from everything I lost, and I came to the emptiest corner of the earth I could find, and I let that emptiness hollow the life right out of me. I called it keeping safe. It wasn't safe. It was just a slow grave I was polite enough to keep digging for myself. One quiet day at a time, his voice roughened and he let it. You want to know where safe is? Safe is not a place you reach by walking far enough. There's no such country, not for anybody. Safe is people standing in a tight ring around the thing they have decided not to lose. That's all it has ever been. That's all it will ever be. Nasha was watching him with something fierce and bright burning behind her dark eyes. Kaya didn't run from that fire, Eli said. An old woman ran toward it. For the youngest of you, and for the smallest of all of us, who isn't even born into this world yet. If she could do that, half-blind and 3 times my age, with a body that could barely climb the loft ladder, then I am not going to stand at her grave and let her have done it for nothing. We rebuild. We hold this ground, and the man who struck that match is going to answer for every bit of it before I'm through. 2 women who had meant to go looked at the grave. Then at the girl Nita, with her hand resting now openly on the curve of her belly, on the life that Kaya had bought with her own. And they stayed. Every one of them stayed. That was the night the ranch stopped being Eli Caldwell's place, where some women happened to work, and became something none of them yet had a word for, but all of them would have died to keep. So they rebuilt. Slowly, because grief makes the hands heavy, but they rebuilt. They raised a new grain store from fresh-cut timber, the pale new wood standing bright against the weathered gray of the older buildings, a scar that was also a kind of defiance. And in the long, patient work of it, the thing that had been growing between Eli and Nasha came fully up into the light, the way the garden had. Slow and then suddenly undeniable. There was no grand declaration. There was no need of one. There was only a man and a woman who had each buried more than most people carry in a lifetime, choosing, day by quiet day, to build a future on top of the graves instead of climbing down into them. Dolly stopped being needed on the porch in the evenings. The 2 of them had built their own crooked bridge of words by then, half her tongue and half his. Enough to say the things that mattered. The weaving became their salvation in more ways than the one. It took the better part of 2 months for the work to find its market, and it found it the way water finds the low ground, slow at first and then all at once. Eli carried a load of it to Dry Hollow himself that autumn, the bright blankets and the patterned cloth folded careful in the wagon bed. And the town that had been so quick to fear what it could not see fell over its own boots to buy what those same feared hands had made. The sheriff's own wife came out into the street and stood with a star-patterned blanket clutched to her chest, asking the price and not blinking at the number, asking only whether there was more. There was more. Word ran out from Dry Hollow to the scattered settlements beyond, the way good news travels in a country starved for it, slow over the long roads but sure. By the turn of the season, traders were making the 3-day haul out to the ranch itself, hungry to buy by the armload and carry it back to towns Eli had never seen. The ruined homestead he had once kept alive by pure stubbornness had become, almost without his noticing the moment it happened, a going concern that fed 26 souls and then some. But money draws eyes the way a lit window draws moths in the dark, and not every eye that turned their way was a friendly one. The sheriff rode out unannounced on a hot, still morning near the end of the second month, and Eli's heart kicked hard at the sight of him coming. Hollis was an old man, gray-headed, with eyes that had looked through a great many lies over a long and tiring career. He stepped down off his horse and let those eyes travel slow around the thriving yard. And they missed nothing, Sheriff. Long way to ride for a social call. Curiosity'll carry a man further than that. Hollis's gaze moved over the new grain store, the timber still pale, and onto the looms just visible through the open workshop door. My wife won't quit talking about these blankets. Says they're the finest things her eyes ever landed on. I figured I'd come meet the hands that make them. They're working, Eli said. Too quick by half. I won't keep them from it long. And the old man was already ambling toward the workshop, easy and unhurried, and there was no way under heaven Eli could stop him that wouldn't shout guilt louder than any silence. 5 women looked up from their looms when the sheriff's shape filled the doorway. Nasha was among them, and her hands went still on the threads. Hollis stopped dead in the door. His eyes took in the black hair and the faces, and the old patterns worked into the cloth, and the understanding moved across his weathered face, slow and total. "They're Apache," he said. "Quiet." Not a question. Ellie said nothing. There was no road left to lie down anymore, and he was tired, suddenly, of trying to find one. Hollis turned and looked at him a long moment. The ones that ran. That the chief's men have been hunting since the spring thaw. They chose to be here, Eli said, and put the whole of himself behind the words. They're not prisoners. They're partners. Every stitch your wife's got wrapped around her shoulders. These women made as free people, for their own profit and mine. The old man walked the length of the workshop, studied the work on the looms, watched the women, who kept their hands moving steady and did not show him the fear they surely felt. He stopped in front of Nasha, who lifted her chin and met his old eyes without dropping her own a hair's width. "You here by your own want?" Hollis asked her. Dolly started forward to translate, but Nasha answered him herself, in English, slow and clear and final as a closing door. "This is my home now. We build something here." "Something better than the thing we ran from?" Hollis held her gaze a beat longer. Then he scratched his jaw, and he turned back to Eli, and the whole of their lives hung on whatever the old man said next. "This is going to set tongues to wagging clear across the territory," Hollis said. "You know how folks are made. Some of them won't like it one bit. There'll be talk, and talk has a way of turning into letters, and letters have a way of reaching men with the authority to make trouble. And you?" Eli asked. It was the only question that mattered. "What'll you do with it?" The sheriff looked around the workshop one more time. The prospering land outside the door. The women bent peaceful to their work, the plain, hard evidence of people who had taken a ruin and made it bloom and hurt no soul in the doing of it. "I've spent 30 years of my life," he said slow, "deciding which folks to drag back to wherever they ran from. A good deal of it I'm not proud to carry. The way I've come to see it, this late in the game. If nobody's being harmed, if they're standing here by their own choice, if they're putting good into the world instead of taking it out, then it is no business of mine, and I'll thank the next man to tell me it's his." He set his hat back square on his gray head. "But you keep it quiet out here. You keep it clean. And if anybody official ever comes asking up from the territory seat, you once heard the word Apache pass my lips because I never said it. Are we square on that?" Relief went through Eli like the first deep drink of water after a long, dry ride. "We're square, and I thank you for it." Hollis swung back up onto his horse, paused with the reins in his hand. "That blue one, with the stars worked into it. My wife's set her heart on it. Can you manage it for her?" Eli almost smiled. The first time the thing had come near his face since the night of the fire. "She'll have it inside the week." It might have ended there, near enough to peace that a man could have called it that and not been lying. It did not. Because Reed Coker had spent his stolen days well, and the rope he'd been paying out was nearly run to its frayed end. The dust came up out of the east 2 days later, and it was far too much dust for 5 riders. Eli stood in the yard and watched it climb into the bright sky, and felt the cold certainty drop into the pit of him. And then he saw, riding at the head of the war party, a white man on a town-bred horse, and the white man was Reed Coker. And the whole shape of the betrayal landed in Eli's chest, like a fist. Coker had brought them, had ridden up into the mountains and stood before the chief and his men and told them. Eli would learn the words only afterward, that the rancher kept the women penned by force, that Nasha was a prisoner in a white man's barn, that the man who claimed they stayed by their own choosing was a liar who had stolen the chief's own daughter and meant to keep her for himself. Coker, whose face the tribe already knew, whose word the tribe had already paid for once with rifles, trusted now because money had passed between them before, and a man who has taken your coin is the last man you think to doubt. And, behind that lie in the town, Coker had whispered the other half of it, that Eli Caldwell was harboring stolen Apache out on the only good well for 30 miles, and bleeding the town's water white to do it. A mob of frightened men had saddled up to ride out and see the matter settled. 2 storms, aimed from opposite ends of the desert, set to break on the same yard in the same hour, and Reed Coker, sitting square in the seam between them, ready to collect from whichever side, was left standing on its feet when the smoke cleared. The war party reined up hard, 20 strong, Tarak among them with his scarred face, set like carved stone. And from the south the dust of the townsmen was already rising to meet them, rifles glinting in it. Eli stood alone in the open yard between 2 converging walls of armed men, and the women came out of the barn at his back. And there was no lie left anywhere, big enough to cover even a corner of it. Caldwell. Coker's voice rang out across the yard, ugly and bright with triumph. Tell them the truth of it. Tell them how you keep these women penned out here. Tell the chief's men what you've done with his own daughter. The townsmen pulled up on the far side, rifles bristling, and Briggs the blacksmith pushed to the front of them looking sick and lost. Eli, in God's name. Coker says you've got the chief's daughter prisoner out here. Says you've been thieving the water to keep them all. Tell me that's a lie. And there it stood, the poison laid out naked in the open sun. 2 armed parties, both fed the same falsehood from the same forked mouth, both ready to spend blood on the strength of it. Eli felt the whole of his life narrow down to the next few breaths. He did not reach for a gun. He had one in the house, and he left it lying there, because he understood, a flash of the clearest thinking he had ever done in his life, that the first man to reach for iron in that yard would prove Coker right and start the killing that Coker was counting on. So he did the harder thing by far. He turned his back on the townsmen's leveled rifles, and he walked straight toward Tarak and the war party. Unarmed, hands open and empty at his sides, Tarak, his voice came flat and steady across the dirt. You came here once before. You stood right about where your horse is standing now, and you asked these women with your own mouth if they stayed by their own want. You heard them answer you. Has that answer changed in the weeks since? Or has one lying white man changed it for you, behind their backs, for his own profit? Tarak's jaw tightened. His eyes went past Eli to Coker and came back. He says you hold her against her will, that she is caged here. You've got eyes in your head. Eli swept one open hand back at the line of women, who stood free and unbound in the open yard. No rope on them, no wall around them, no man set to guard them. Does that look like a cage to you? Ask her again. Ask Nasha. Same as you did before. And this time, when she answers, look hard at the man who told you different, and ask yourself what he stands to be paid for the lie. Tarak looked at Coker, who had ridden in believing he held both ends of the rope tight in his fists, made the one mistake a liar always makes the moment the lie begins to wobble under him. He pushed too hard. Don't listen to the man. He'll say anything to keep them. Coker snapped, his voice climbing. Take the woman and let's be done here. You owe me that much. You owe me after the gun's eye. The word landed in the silent yard like a dropped anvil. The guns, said aloud, in front of the townsmen, in front of the chief's warriors, by a man too rattled now to guard his own buried dealings. Tarak went very still in his saddle. You speak of that. Here. His voice dropped to something low and terrible. Of the rifles run to us in the dark, against your own people's law. You name it out loud, in front of these men, to save your lie. His eyes moved slow over Coker. A man who would sell guns to us in secret, and then sell us a story for profit, and sell these town men a different story in the same breath. That is not a man whose word I will spill one drop of blood to honor. And the lie came apart all at once, the way a rotten rope parts under a full load. Fiber by fiber, and then all at once and entirely, because Nasha stepped forward then, past Eli, and she spoke to Tarak in their shared tongue, fast and clear, and ringing. Dolly did not translate it, and Eli did not need her to. He could read the meaning plain on the warriors' faces as it landed. She was telling them who had come to the mountains, carrying the lie. She was telling them what this man had done for silver in winters past, and what he was doing now, and that a peace bought back with a falsehood was no peace at all, but only the next war, wearing a borrowed mask and waiting its turn. Tarak turned his horse to face Coker full on. We took your rifles once, he said. That was our shame, and we will carry it as ours. But we will not become your knife. We will not kill for a man who sells the same word to 3 buyers and waits in the rocks to rob. Whichever one is left bleeding, he raised his voice and turned it on the townsmen across the yard. Hear me, men of the town. This one came to us with a lie about your rancher. He came to you with another. He meant for us to cut each other down in this yard over his profit, and meant to gather up whatever fell. The rancher holds no one. Look at them. Ask them. The lie is his. He thrust his chin at Coker. Not theirs. Briggs the blacksmith lowered his rifle slow, and his broad, sick face had traveled all the way to fury. That true, Coker? You set the fire out here too, didn't you? You been feeding us one tale and them another, playing the whole country for fools so you could pick the bones. Coker's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it that could save him. He hauled his horse around hard to run. He did not get far. The townsmen he had tried to turn into murderers ran him down before he reached the open desert. Because a town that lives or dies by trusting its neighbors has a short, hard memory for a man who tried to spend that trust on a massacre. What Dry Hollow did with Reed Coker after that was the town's own grim business. It was not gentle, and Eli did not watch it done. The war party did not move to leave. Tarak sat his horse a long moment, looking at the women, at the thriving ranch, at the fresh grave beyond the green garden with its turned and settling earth. One of yours is in that ground, he said. She ran into a burning building for the youngest of them, Eli answered, and for the child not yet born. The fire that liar set to drive us off, Tarak was quiet a while. Then he looked at Nasha, and he spoke to her gently. in a tone Eli had not heard from him before, and whatever passed between the two of them was the closing of something very old. When he was done, Dolly's voice came thick. He says he will go back to her father. He will tell him the truth of what his daughter has built out here in the waste, with her own hands, among strangers. He will tell him that the old ways still have a living voice in this place, when they have gone silent nearly everywhere else under the sky. He cannot promise. Her father will choose to hear it. He will carry it true this time, with his own mouth, and not let another man carry it false. Tell him, Eli said. The gate stays open. Any of her people that want to come see what she's made out here, they ride in with empty hands and they're welcome at the well. Same as any thirsty soul that ever stood where she first stood. Tarak almost smiled. Almost. He raised one hand, and the war party wheeled as a single body. And they rode east into the shimmering heat. And this time the desert that swallowed them did not feel like an ending. It felt like a road that had been left open on purpose for someone to ride back down someday. That night they did not mourn. They had mourned, and they would mourn Kaya again, on other nights, for years. But that night, under a sky so crowded with stars, it looked like spilled salt flung across black cloth. They gathered around a fire in the yard and ate from the garden the old woman had helped wake from the dead, and they raised cups of plain water drawn from the well that had begun all of it. Nasha stood with her cup lifted, and she spoke words in her own tongue, and Dolly gave them to the firelit night, to new beginnings, to second chances at a first life, to the family we choose for ourselves, and not the one that is forced upon us. To family, Eli said, and drank, and let his eyes go around, the ring of faces lit gold by the flames. The woman beside him, whose hand had found his in the dark and not let go. The girl Nita, with her palm resting on the life she carried, the life an old woman had bought outright with her own. The 24 who remained of the 25, who had walked up out of those mountains, and the one who slept now beyond the garden and ground she had made bloom. 2 worlds met at a well in the middle of a nowhere so complete that the rest of the earth had forgotten it, and out of a single cup of water, handed over without a question. On a blazing afternoon, a whole new life had grown up green, where there had been only a man, slowly covering himself over with sand. Here is where I want to set the story down for a moment, before the fire burns down to its embers, and tell you the thing it has been trying to say from the very first cup, because this was never only a tale about a lonesome rancher and a deep well. It is about the smallest thing a person can offer another. 1 cup of water, handed to a stranger, you have every reason in the world to fear. And about how that one small kindness, given freely, with no thought of getting anything back, can grow into something that neither the one who gives it nor the one who takes it could ever have dreamed. Eli Caldwell did not set out to shelter the hunted, or to plant his own body between 2 nations, or to bury his grief in the hard work of bringing dead ground back to life. He only decided in a single unremarkable moment beside his well, not to be the kind of man who turns away the thirsty. Every other thing grew out of that one quiet choice. We forget how often the whole long course of a life turns on a choice as small as that one. We tell ourselves the big things must come from big decisions, made in big moments, with trumpets sounding. They rarely do. They come from the ordinary moment when you decide whether the stranger standing at your gate is a threat to be driven off, or a soul as frightened and as worthy as your own. And most of us decide it before we have heard a single word of their story. We look at the dust on their clothes and the difference in their faces, and we shut the door, and we go to our graves never once learning what we locked outside. Eli very nearly did the same. His own hand flew to his belt before he had even turned to see who stood behind him. Fear came first. The fear always comes first in all of us. The difference was only this, and it is the only difference that ever matters. He let the fear have its 1 second, and then he set it down, and he looked again. And the second time he looked, he did not see an enemy. He saw a person as desperate to go on living as he himself had once been, on a road 3 years back, with everything he loved gone into the ground behind him. That is the whole of it. That is the only thing the desert has ever had to teach anyone. The distance between a door you slam and a door you open is about the width of one held breath, and what a person chooses to do inside that one breath becomes, in time, the entire shape of their life. They called these women property. Their own people called them it, and the town called them it, and the law would have called them it too. Property, to be married off and bought back, and traded away for a peace between men. And what Eli came to understand, what it cost a brave old woman her life to prove past all argument, is that no human being is a thing that can be owned. Not by a tribe, not by a husband chosen for them, not by a debt, or a price, or a treaty. A person is not the coin somebody paid to get them. A person is what they choose, and who they decide to stand beside, and what they build with the few days they are given under the sky. So, before you go, let me ask you the thing this old story asked of me. How many people have we turned away at our own gate? Simply because we had already decided who they were before we ever troubled to learn their names. How many cups of water have we kept back in our hands, out of a fear that would have melted clean away, the moment we let ourselves look at the thirsty soul a second time? And here is the harder question. The one that costs something to answer honestly. Have you ever been the stranger at the gate yourself? Have you ever stood thirsty in front of someone, judged and dismissed before you got a single word out, had one person, just one, choose to truly see you instead of fear you? Most of us have, somewhere, in some smaller desert of our own making or someone else's, and most of us never do forget the face of the one who chose to hand us the water. Maybe that is the whole of what we are all doing here, every one of us. Standing at each other's gates, deciding, one held breath at a time, whether to reach for the bucket or reach for the belt. Eli Caldwell reached for the bucket, and it handed him back a life he had buried and given up for dead. If this story moved something in you tonight, I would truly like to hear of it. Have you ever shown kindness to someone the world had already judged and written off? Or been shown that kindness yourself, on a day you least expected it and needed it the most? Tell me about it down in the comments below. And tell me, too, what part of the world you are watching from tonight, because I always love to know. For somewhere out past your own gate tonight, there is a stranger who is only thirsty, and the whole of who you turn out to be might just come down to what you choose to do in the breath right after you finally see them.